Oh,
Okay. The Germans are searching for solutions. They will extend their conscription period by 3 months, but that is a short time. Palliative. Palliative. Moreover, further extending that effort over time will, I think, almost certainly produce social strains similar to some of those experienced in this country during the Vietnam period. So I am pessimistic about the capacity of at least our northern European allies to continue to make the minimum necessary contributions to the standing armies of the West. In the absence of a sense of danger in the West, it is going to be difficult to maintain a sufficient peacetime military force. One of the consequences of this, ironically, might be a return to the emphasis of the 1950s on nuclear weapons as opposed to conventional defenses. We have made a great effort in recent years to emphasize conventional defenses. The stockpile of American nuclear weapons has actually declined since 1967. We have roughly a third fewer nuclear weapons today than we had then, and the destructive power, or megatonnage, of those weapons is barely a quarter of what it was in the 1960s. This has been the result of a deliberate effort to minimize reliance on nuclear weapons. One consequence of current demographic trends may well be a regrettable reversal of this positive effort to de-emphasize nuclear weapons. Fewer troops, less defense, more reliance on nuclear weapons. Under likely future circumstances, are nuclear weapons credible? Who would believe that Americans would possibly risk using nuclear weapons to defend a Europe already committing slow-motion demographic suicide? Such a vision does not even need raw conquest to draw a scenario for disaster. A simple series of political caving in by the weak to the strong would be a more likely occurrence, perhaps finally vindicating the theory of the Finlandization of Western Europe. What the fuck? But the Soviet bloc is only the West's most obvious rival. In military forces, only one aspect of global power and influence. Perhaps as important as whether the U.S. military defense will remain adequate is whether, in the broadest sense, the world will remain a place in which our values are respected and our culture welcomed. That challenge could eventually come mostly from the Third World, perhaps in an uneasy collaboration with the communist world. We continue our speculation. What do we know about the less developed countries, LDCs? Foremost is that in terms of population, the Third World is already first in the world. The Third World today constitutes almost 3/4 of the global population. By the end of the next century, if current trends do not change, the ratio will be about 90%. That is, the democratic industrial nations will be about 50% of the total population. The Soviet bloc nations will be almost 5%, and the LDCs about 90%. That 90% share made up by the LDCs will amount to about 9 billion people. That alone is twice the current population of the world. And these numbers take into account the fact that fertility has already fallen in the Third World and will surely continue to fall. If one were to take only numbers into account, it is clear that the Third World will inherit the Earth. But, as has been discussed here, although numbers count, they are not everything. Technology counts, wealth counts, and culture counts. It is in the realm of culture that the Third World, paradoxically, could both weaken itself and harm us if the birth dearth situation obtains. We speak here, of course, of generalities. As indicated earlier, the idea of a Third World encompasses a broad range of nations, peoples, beliefs, and levels of development. Still, the United Nations calls the group the less developed countries, with their acquiescence and support. Despite a substantial amount of progress in recent decades, most of the LDCs are often desperately poor by any Western standard. Beyond that, the great majority of the peoples of the Third World are, in fact, living in pre-modern circumstances. Rural China, where most of the nation's people live, is still a peasant, quasi-totalitarian water buffalo economy, despite the recent important and heartening reforms. Jeez. India has made real progress in recent years, but 3/4 of the country is made up of very poor peasants, some of whom still live within a cruel caste system. Some? At least China and India have moved ahead from a very low base in recent years, but many of the nations in sub-Saharan Africa have stagnated or even retrogressed. Our television sets have shown us that the ugly sights of famine, disease, and war stalk the lands. Now, to be sure, there are aspects of beauty, profundity, and deep substance in many of these cultures. Yet, it is also true that much of the Third World is living in a time other than ours. For the most part, it is a world where people do not vote in any serious democratic way, with India and most of the Latin American countries the most notable exceptions. It may be a world of serfdom or animal worship. It may be a world where the full notion of contract is not yet penetrated, making modern business difficult. It is still a world where, in vast realms, most people do not read or write. It can be a world where women are regarded as inferior beings, treated like cattle. In short, it is a set of cultures alien to ours. It is a set of cultures that does not, or at least has not yet, come close to providing the level of living or the freedoms of the Western world. Now, as demonstrated, the Third World will be growing larger, both absolutely and relatively, in the decades to come. Could the Third World culture become dominant? Could it erode our cultures? We do not know. Many LDCs are advancing and doing it by adopting Western culture. That is surely a plus for us. But many other nations cling to old ways. That is all right for them if they want it, but not necessarily in our best interest. Other nations seek to synthesize modernism with old cultures. Some important nations have retrogressed. Iran comes most quickly to mind. In any event, how can one measure such an amorphous